Not everyone, however, is as excited about that promise of change. Outside of another inaugural event Trump held for campaign fundraisers, protesters demonstrated against what they call his fascist and racist views. Well, for more on those protests, we're joined by Nick Harper, who's standing by for us in Washington, D.C. Nick, this really is an unprecedented event and level of opposition, isn't it, for a presidential inauguration to see this kind of opposition beyond bipartisan rivalry?
That's right, Sandra. Yes, we're seeing huge levels of opposition towards Donald Trump. Of course, there have been protests in the past towards other presidents. Think back to 2008 when President Obama won the election, or the year 2000 when George W. Bush won. There were protests against them, but it's been a very long time since we've had a presidential candidate who has been as unpopular as Donald Trump has been. Even some of his supporters admit that they don't feel he's done a very good job between winning the election and his inauguration. So we're likely to see a weekend of protests over the next few days. Thousands of people will be out across America showing their displeasure at the president. Obviously, they know the result of the election, but they still want their voices to be heard. These are the Americans who say Donald Trump is not their president, who feel he won't act in their best interests.
You are not alone. We are the majority. We are the majority.
On the eve of his inauguration, hundreds of people gathered in the shadow of the Trump International Hotel on the corner of Central Park, including the city's mayor.
Donald Trump may control the agenda in Washington, but we control our destiny as Americans.
Donald Trump, however, wasn't in New York, instead sticking with tradition and spending the night before the inauguration at the presidential guest house in Washington, D.C. Yet when he takes the oath on Capitol Hill on Friday, he'll enter office as the most unpopular president in 40 years. That's according to a new poll. Following the election in November, hundreds of people marched in New York, Trump's home city. And hundreds of thousands are expected to protest throughout America over the coming days, even though the result of the election is not in doubt. Nothing can change the fact that within hours, Donald Trump will be the next US president. But by coming out here tonight en masse, the people hope they can send a very clear message.
Mr. Trump should be cognizant of the fact that a very large number of people disagree with his policies and with his cabinet choices.
A rhetoric that's more positive and pro-immigration is important.
He's very selective about who he thinks an American is. And that's what we're here to say. We don't believe in that.
Protesters and speakers alike said tonight's rally was only the beginning, that they intend to keep the pressure and protests up for the next 4 years of President Trump's time in office. Well, about 1 million people are expected in the capital, Washington, D.C. on Friday to watch President Trump's inauguration. But that will be a mixture of supporters and protesters. So that means extra security. About 30,000 police officers are being drafted into the Capitol to try and keep it safe. There'll be miles of roadblocks and perimeters set up around the city to create a 3-square-mile cordon around the whole of the central part of D.C. And then after that, we'll see hundreds of thousands of people take to the streets of Washington on Saturday for the Women's March on Washington, with a sister march taking place here in New York on Saturday, a march that will start at the United Nations and end up at the doors of Trump Tower. Sandra?
Now, Nick, one question many are asking is, will he or won't he stay and live in the White House after his inauguration?
Well, his team at this stage are saying that he will be in the White House through the end of the weekend. They're not saying what's going to happen next week. The likelihood is that he will want to meet with some of his top team on Monday to try and get to work, to try and draw up all of those policies, come up with the plans of what he wants to enact over the next 4 years. But yes, there is a very big question mark about how much he will be commuting from DC to New York City, because his wife and his son are remaining here in New York. York until the end of this academic year in June, when his son finishes at his New York school. So President Trump is saying that he will be commuting to a certain extent between the Capitol and between Trump Tower in New York. All of that, of course, causing a security headache for officials between the two cities and here in New York as well. It's likely to be a very interesting few months. He will not be a president who wants to remain locked up within the Oval Office, that's for sure.
Hugely interesting indeed. Many thanks for the update, Nick Harper there in Washington.